In What Is It Like to Be a Bat?, Thomas Nagel argues that the answer to this eponymous question is we can't know what it's like to be a bat. In particular, we can't know what it's like for a bat to be a bat. Nagel's idea is that we can understand what it's like to be another creature only to the extent that we can empathetically imagine ourselves as that creature. The good news is that we have the capacity for empathetic imagination, so we're often able to have a pretty good idea of what it's like to be another person. The bad news is that even understanding what it's like to be another person has its limits. I can only empathetically imagine what it's like to be another person to the extent that I can take up their point of view. The idea that what it's like to be us is essentially tied to a point of view is central to Nagel's thought. Start with the literal sense of the term. As I stand here speaking to you, I'm facing one direction, and you, via the camera, are facing a different direction. If I want to know what it's like to be a student in this class, I can begin by taking up your point of view. For example, going around to behind the camera and seeing how things look from there. If I want to know what it's like to be a bit taller, I can stand on my tiptoes. And if I want to know what it's like to be a bit shorter, I can bend down. But your point of view, in the sense relevant to what it's like to be you, is not exhausted by where you stand, which direction you face, and how tall you are. Seeing things from your point of view also involves having certain kinds of background knowledge and experience. Some of those are so common that we take them for granted, like having the ability to recognize certain objects as books or to read words. Others are more subtle. Can you empathetically imagine how this scene looks to someone who has blurry vision, someone who's colorblind, or someone who has a form of synesthesia where they experience colors when they hear sounds? And that's just the beginning. There are also personal, social, and cultural factors. My point of view is the point of view of a white American male of a certain age, education, and income. That's probably not as important to how I see this room as it is to other experiences I have, like the experience of when a police officer pulls me over for speeding. Whatever the details, there's no doubt that what it's like to be us includes aspects of things like gender, race, sexual identity, social and economic background, religious or irreligious upbringing, and education, wealth, and more. These can both enable empathetic imagination and be obstacles. Now then, Nagel tells us that he chose the example of bats because bats are biologically quite similar to us, they're mammals, while at the same time having a form of life that's fundamentally alien to ours. I can imagine hanging upside down in the dark, eating bugs and whatnot, but that strikes us as still falling far short of knowing what it's like to have a bat's way of life. And it's certainly very remote from knowing what it's like for a bat to be a bat. Having drawn our attention to the possibilities and limits of empathetic imagination, Nagel explains these facts in terms of what he calls the subjective character of experience. The idea is that conscious experience is subjective in the sense that it belongs to a particular subject or a kind of subject, or, as he sometimes says, it's inherently tied to a point of view. You can't have my experience from a point of view other than mine. So your ability to understand what it's like to be me is limited by your ability to empathetically imagine that you are me. And that is constrained by how similar you are to me. We might be able to get pretty far in empathetically imagining what it's like to be someone rather similar to ourselves. But any account of what it's like to be me that doesn't completely capture my point of view will have left something out, or so Nagel thinks. The trouble, according to Nagel, is that scientific theories, which he sometimes calls physicalist or materialist theories, have no point of view. They take up what he sometimes calls the view from nowhere, which is not a point of view at all. That is, they take up the point of view that includes many points of view and therefore occupies no particular point of view. Scientific theories, therefore, are not subjective, they're objective. And this is what creates the paradox, according to Nagel, around the very idea of having a scientific explanation of what it's like to be conscious. That is, an objective explanation of subjective experience. Nagel thinks that this same tension between objective and subjective points of view lies at the root of many philosophical problems, such as those around death, luck, sexual morality, just warfare, political ruthlessness, and the meaning of life. And highlighting the tension between objective and subjective points of view is Nagel's way of posing the so-called mind-body problem. What's the relationship between minds and psychology on the one hand and brains and bodies on the other? How can we understand the existence of minds, things with point of view, in a world that doesn't otherwise seem to include points of view? Now, notice that in one sense this is not a unique or unprecedented question. We can ask the same question about life, that is, about living things. And for that matter, we can ask the same question about tables and chairs. But Nagel thinks that we can answer that question about life. And he thinks that the reason that we have a mind-body problem, but not a life-body problem or a table-wood problem, is that minds involve points of view. There's something that it's like to have a mind. Nagel is challenging us to answer the question, how can minds be explained? And he thinks the answer is, we don't know. Now that we have a sense of what Nagel's trying to accomplish in this article, let's take a closer look at his reasoning in the next lesson.